Welcome to my channel. The colors that you'll need today are titanium white, permanent yellow light, permanent yellow deep, high roll red, madder lake, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and burnt umber. I actually don't use the phthalo blue, but I usually do have some of that on the palette. I may be taking it off if I don't use it soon. We begin with a mixture of ultramarine blue and madder lake. This creates a dark purple, which I use to begin the drawing process. All of these paints today are water mixable oils. They're produced by Royal Talons, and the line of paint is called Cobra. Available from your local art store or Blix, as well as Jerry's Artorama, are two places that a lot of artists will order their supplies from. Today's painting, we're looking at really concentrating on how to get different greens. Sometimes people really struggle with green. You'll notice that on my palette, I don't have a green. I mix all of my greens from my yellows and my blues. And here we're just creating the large shapes. This is a very steep hill with some shrubbery or trees. So I'm trying to get some various shapes on as quickly as possible to create that. And then we're also going to push the painting back with some perspective. And so we're going to create a little field in the back with some distant hills or mountains. And that's that line that's coming in here, the horizon line. I use hog bristle brushes. This is from Princeton. I use a very inexpensive line of the Princeton brushes. This one's called the Ashley line. So it's a natural hog bristle brush, but fairly economical in terms of price. Here, just creating a little bit of variety. I want to suggest some variety in this foreground hill. Today, I'm just using my imagination, so this is not an actual scene. I'm not using a photo reference here. I'm using my experience painting in the outdoors and just relying upon my memory. Keep in mind that when you're putting the big shapes in, like I've told you in some of the other videos, it's going to look ugly first, and that's a-okay. You're really just focusing on the biggest shapes. Notice here there's really only three big shapes: the foreground hill, the field in the background, and then the sky. And then, of course, some of the foliage on the hill. Now for this mixture of green, that's ultramarine blue, and permanent yellow light. And I may be also putting in just a little touch of the madder lake. Red tends to gray down the mixture, creating a very nice green, a more naturalistic looking green. You certainly do not want to start off with phthalo blue and mixing that in with any one of your yellows. I tend to find, and maybe that's why I haven't used much phthalo blue in the past, and even though I put a little bit on my palette today, I don't believe I use it at all, is that the mixtures I often find look rather artificial. And now I'm coming back in over top of the initial darks. By the way, the underpainting today was painted several days ago, so it dried thoroughly, and it's a transparent red oxide. Whenever I'm doing a painting where I know that there's going to be lots and lots of green, I think it's best to start with an underpainting that has some red in it. Here again, just varying the strokes and getting that onto the panel. Today's panel is a canvas panel. It's 11 by 14, or 14 by 11 as it's set up on my Maybeth easel. This is a full easel made by May Beth. I find that if you're going to have a French easel, this is the one to get. Here I'm just showing you that I am lightening that green pile of color with a little bit of titanium white in order to lay in those distant hills, to get those to sit back a little bit from the foreground trees I just laid in. This might be a good time to point out that when you are beginning to cover the canvas, one of the things that I learned early on is that you want to try to cover the canvas with paint as quickly as possible and realize that you're just wanting to approximate the color that you're viewing or seeing or imagining in this case. And then when you get the canvas totally covered with different paints, it will become clearer which mixtures need to be changed. So in other words, you just go for an approximate color. You may hit it on the first attempt, but realize that you may not. But the one thing that oils, even water mixable oils, have this in common, is that they're very forgiving, and so you can easily, as long as you're painting in very thin layers, you can go back in over top of them and correct the color mixture. Here, with that lighter green, I've now mixed in a little bit more of the permanent yellow light to create a little bit of distinction between this green and the other green. And it's all by trial and error, usually, to get these various greens. And so, obviously, there's a side of these trees that's going to receive more light than the other. And it's going to be the side that is either directly in the light of the sun, or from the sun on the from above. And so I've approximated that on these tree groupings at this point. Notice I'm not worried too much about the edges. I'm going to come back in and shape those trees. But for now, I'm just trying to get that approximate color in the big shapes on the canvas. Here, same thing. I'm trying to approximate the color that I want for the fields that are sitting behind this hill. And so I've added some titanium white to the green mixture of permanent yellow light and ultramarine blue rather. And once again, you will see that later on I decide that this is not going to be the green, that it's not pushed back far enough, nor does it convey a sense of light that I wish it to. So I will be changing that color. But for now, it's good enough. It is an approximate color. And like I said, you can't always tell this until all the other colors are actually on the painting. And as long as I keep these very thin, I can always go back. Here, I'm adding a little bit more yellow to that mixture. Once again, permanent yellow light. Realizing that as things come forward, they're picking up more light and become more colorful. And so I'm trying to approximate that now. This mixture of green really isn't that bad, but in the act of painting, just changed my mind in terms of what kind of green I really wanted for that moment. So you'll see that coming up later. And like I said, with a very limited palette here, we only have 2 yellows and 2 blues, and I don't even use the one blue. So every variation of green is just a matter of patiently mixing different tonal values with those 3 colors. A little bit more blue, a little bit more yellow, and modifying as we go. So notice how quickly we've already moved into covering a large portion of the canvas. Now, once again, yellow permanent white with ultramarine blue being mixed into it, trying to create a different, darker variation of that green. And this is going to be the hill color, which should be a little bit more intensely green, but lighter than the trees. The trees and any foliage are going to be the darkest colors of green on a painting, because anything that is, think of it this way, anything that's vertical is going to just be darker. It's just notice that when you're out looking at nature, anything that's growing upward is going to be a darker color. Your lightest plane, if you will be the sky, of course, or at least usually. I guess I shouldn't say that for a matter of fact, but it could be a nocturne picture or something. But normally the sky is the lightest, and then the landmass, the flat landmass, which receives the second biggest amount of light, is going to be the next lightest large area on your canvas. And then from there, you go to the verticals, which will usually be your darkest. Here, you notice I'm varying the green again, just with the same mixture, only two colors, ultramarine blue, and then the permanent yellow light. I may have mixed in a tad bit of the permanent yellow deep to create a little bit more warmth in certain areas here. Notice as it's coming down that slope, it's getting a little bit thicker paint, a little bit darker paint, to give us the illusion that this plane is a little bit closer now to the viewer. There, mixing in some more yellow, so I'm also cognizant of the fact that as that hill begins to flatten out, it's going to pick up more light from the sun, and therefore it's going to be more yellow in this green mixture than the deep green. And hopefully you can see that with this video. Some people have been asking me, so what equipment am I using to film these videos? Interestingly enough, I'm a cheapskate, of course, and so this is just the camera off of my iPhone SE, which is, I think, the second generation SE. So, but still pretty good camera. Maybe one day, as you buy more paintings from me and watch more demos, I'll eventually feel like investing in a really good camera. I'd like to get up to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours watched in order to make the YouTube guidelines for monetizing the channel. But we're a ways away from that at this point in time. But since I'm talking about that today, if you would like to help me out, one of the best ways you can do that is to subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and watch some more videos. That would be great. I'd appreciate it. Maybe if you got friends that are painters, or even just people that like to watch paintings being painted, it's a very relaxing activity to watch some of these videos that are demonstrations of painting. Feel free to encourage them to do so. I always think of Bob Ross, who had such a great following, and a lot of folks didn't really paint with him as he did his demos, but they certainly enjoyed the relaxing atmosphere of being able to watch someone paint. Doesn't have the stress involved with so many other things that you can watch these days. Now here, again, all I'm doing is varying the amount of ultramarine blue in comparison to the permanent yellow. And so the more ultramarine blue you add, of course, you're going to get a deeper, darker green shade. If it becomes too blue, then I will add a little bit of the pyrrole red or the madder lake, my red colors on the palette, to gray it down some. And by graying it down just means to kind of dirty up the color. See how that darker green there at the very bottom of the painting makes you feel like it's closer to you? And that's what I mean by varying variations of this green. Now, a lot of people don't find greens particularly beautiful, but notice as this painting's progressing that there's quite a bit of variety in those strokes and in the greens. I'm leaving that little section in the middle unpainted at this point, and just to provide some variety and to make sure that the viewer can sense that there are elevation differences as you are walking up this hill. And this hill is becoming the vantage point for looking out on that field. And so, at least for me, the focal point, if you want a focal point in this particular painting, it is that field and those distant hills. And now I'm trying to highlight that a little bit by this mixture of sky, which is made of a little bit of the ultramarine blue and then titanium white. Notice how that's beginning to pop out at you because this is the lightest color on the panel at this point. Notice too, as I'm adding that, how the transparent red oxide really stands out and starting to come forward. It's a kind of greenish red at the top of the picture, but that's also helps the eyes focus in on these greens. And so there will be little pixels, if you will, of that orange that will not be covered by the paint and will show through these light strokes of paint and will actually provide some relief for your eyes as you view the finished painting. So now what I do is that oftentimes when you're looking at the sky, you will notice that as you look upward, the sky is a little bit darker blue. And so now I've mixed in just a little bit more of the ultramarine blue into that pool of color that was already on the palette. And now I'm applying it to the canvas panel. Notice I'm leaving space in between the two colors. What I have found is an easy way to provide a variant of the blues is to do this, to paint your different colors in stripes. And then what I will do later is that I will come back with a dry brush and begin to mix those two colors together into that space. By the way, I often would describe myself as a impressionist type painter, but to honestly be real with you, the impressionists never blended. They tended just to put the paint down and leave it alone. I try to do that on many of my works, but there are times in which I really like the effect I can get by blending. And notice that we're only 18 minutes into this painting, and already I have covered the canvas completely with paint. This is something that is helpful to you when you paint either in the studio or especially outdoors in what we call plein air. You want to develop a style that allows you to have loose brush strokes. As you can tell, these are very loose brush strokes to begin with here. And just getting these things down as quickly as possible because the atmosphere, the scene is always changing in terms of the light and the shadows. So now today I'm just painting from my imagination, so I wouldn't have to rush if I didn't want to, but I've just gotten in the habit of trying to paint as quickly as possible. Here I'm just cleaning off the brush. I use shop towels, and because these are water mixable oils, I've got a collapsible water bowl that I use. Now I'm taking this probably a number 8 or number 6 flat hog bristle brush and going back and forth over that area that wasn't covered to create the sense that there's this gradual shift to the darker blue. See how that's looking now? I don't really want it to take on the effect of some kind of a flag, right? Where you can see a definite line. So what we're doing is using a blending technique to soften those edges and produce some interesting brush strokes, I hope. You can certainly still see some variation in the sky. And the mind itself can actually begin to interpret this as some clouds in terms of some of the various intensity of the blues that you see. Now, doesn't that look pretty realistic, don't you think? With these greens and then with these blues. And here, I'm just trying to soften these shapes a little bit and use a very loose brush strokes, varying various ways of doing this horizontally there and also using the brush vertically. And here I'm just trying to get the effect that I want. And I think I've got it there. And then I'm going to go back in. And I believe the next thing I'm going to be painting here, I may redo those mountains or hills in the distance along that plane line, or horizontal line rather. And then I will go back in with another dry brush and start working on the foliage, the trees or shrubs that we see on this elevated hill in the foreground. Now here, looked like a mixture of titanium white into my green pool. Of course, oftentimes I'll take a moment to just look at what I've already painted and begin to tell whether or not I want to change things. Oh, I think at this point in the video, actually, I am looking at that underpainting that's showing through in a little bit of a squiggly line, if you will, in the foreground. There we go. And so I'm coming back in with this mixture of brownish white mixture, titanium white, with a mixture of a little bit of ultramarine and the permanent yellow light, as well as a little bit of the madder lake. And trying to get some variations. And once in a while, what you'll see here is that I actually am not very happy with this. I should have just left it alone and perhaps added some variety without doing this. This light color is not making sense in terms of its tonal value. I will become aware of this, although right now I feel like I'm committed. And so sometimes when you feel like you're committed to putting a particular paint mixture down, you could just continue to do it. Even though you're thinking all the time, oh, I'm going to have to take this off, or I'm going to have to change this up somehow. And you'll see me change my mind on it. It doesn't look very realistic at this point. It doesn't produce the effect that I wanted. And so right away I can tell that. And I'll begin to think about maybe creating some rocks out of this light mixture, as if the sun is shining on the tops of the rocks. And so that's what I'm attempting to do now with creating a darker brown mixture using the burnt umber and that previous pool of color, which was mainly titanium white and all three of the primaries mixed together. So here you see this dark going on. And partly one of the reasons I'm showing this is to let you know that all of us do it from time to time. We put some element into a painting and do not get there on the first try. And so we end up repainting things. Here, I feel like I'm getting a sense of movement and some interesting shapes, and that seems to be making more sense to me. It was screaming at me that it was way too light when it first went down. So I'm feeling much better about the shapes that are being created right now in this painting. And of course, that's not going to last either because I'm going to do a few things and end up changing this section again. And sometimes that happens. You have a section of painting that you just cannot seem to get it to go right the first time. And then if it doesn't go right the first time, it seems like it takes you several tries to kind of fix that area. You noticed how quickly I was able to paint the other sections and felt relatively well about it. And oftentimes, when you're able to paint loosely like that, you will discover a sort of sense of nature, of unpredictability that's represented by those strokes. And when you try to fuss on a certain area, you begin to be consumed by fussing over the area. Now, the nice thing about oils, like I said before, oils are very forgiving. I could take a palette knife at any point and scrape this area down to the underpainting again and try once more with a different mixture of green. Other times, you can modify the color and paint over top of what you previously had down there. Here's another brownish purple mix using all of the primaries. So this would be one of the yellows, one of the blues, one of the reds, and then a little bit of titanium white mixed into it. And here I'm using that as a background color for those distant hills and added some titanium white to push that back. Here I'm just taking and trying to get rid of the randomness, or rather put randomness in to those distant hills so that it doesn't look like I've really given it all that much thought. I want it to look more like nature, which means more random. So, and once again, I'm pretty confident that this is working out well. It's a grayish purple, produced once again with different combination of the amount of each of the primaries and a little bit of titanium white to push that color back in terms of its tonal value. Notice then the basically the only colors on this painting today are greens and blues. That's it. Wiping off the brush and then also analyzing the painting at this point. I'm contemplating even at this point that maybe the painting is done. And looking at it here on the replay and talking to you, I probably could have stopped here, honestly. I think that it does everything I wanted to do right here, but sometimes you push forward, and I'm looking at that maybe it's a little bit too boring in the foreground and thinking that I need some more highlights, some more foliage um, to draw the viewer's attention. So I'm now creating another green. This is where I changed the field color, I believe. In some ways, as I look at this playback, I kind of like the green I already had on there in terms of the field. And so we'll see if you like it better and the change that I make. See, I come back in with a much more saturated yellowy green, just varying the different amounts. This color isn't bad, but the original one also worked, I do believe. This just amounts to putting a little bit more highlights in terms of the sun shining on it, turning it into a sunnier day, I would suspect. Varying my brush strokes to kind of simulate the effect that different fields would have. Also trying to remember that as I grow closer to the viewer, that the green would become a little bit darker, even though it is sunlit. And so I pretty much stop at that point here with that field. And like I said, could have worked with the other green that I had on that field, but this creates more contrast, I do think. It really accentuates the trees that are on this hill, or shrubs or bushes, whatever you might want to make them out to be. And now I'm contemplating, and I think that this point is when I will go in and try to give a few highlights to those trees or shrubs by taking a relatively dry brush. Now I'm rinsing that brush in water. I think I only used 2 brushes in this entire painting. Well, no, 3. I used the rigger in the last detail parts. Mainly an 8 and a 6 are the 2 brushes that I used, or an 8 and 4 actually, 8 and 4 that I used. A little bit bigger brush and then a smaller brush. And there, well, I was wrong. I'm telling you the wrong thing. This is a round. This is a number 2 round, and I decided to go back in and use this small brush, this round brush, to give me a better effects with some of the foliage, so that it doesn't look like meatballs. At least that's what it looked like to me at first. A bunch of meatballs on the landscape. Maybe I'm just hungry tonight. Well, I just ate supper. I shouldn't be hungry again, but anyhow, I do like to eat. Well, here we go. So now I'm just playing with the tops of those colors and suggesting some variety. And see how I'm doing that? Just kind of pulling some of the colors that are already there on the canvas up and back and forth, and then wiping some of the excess of that paint so I don't create too much mud. Now you can go overboard with this, and then you end up destroying the forms that were originally there. But like I said, part of what I wanted to do was I didn't really want your attention on those meatball trees. I want your attention out there on the field and those distant mountains. I want you to kind of sense the peace that comes from taking maybe a trail up a steep slope, and then being able to see the distance, which is often why we take a trail, right? To get up to a higher vantage point, to be able to look down below and see some of the beauty of the landscape. And so that's what I'm attempting to do in this particular painting. And then see how I'm just kind of turning that brush in a circular motion as I'm just mixing those paint colors together a little bit, trying to suggest here a few branches that might be popping up towards the sky. And I want the movement to be inward towards the painting. I don't want to pull your attention off of the canvas. Now, there's always a danger when you have this as your composition, because the line that's created by those distant mountains might take you off the canvas. But my hope is that more than that in this painting, that it's actually bringing you into the painting from the side. And that might be enough to hold your attention here. Then I'm taking that round and just also trying to get a little bit more variety in the slope and in those greens, to break up the shades a little bit with different random strokes. So you notice there's not a lot of color variation on that hill in the foreground, but there's enough randomness of those brush strokes to suggest that there's different areas of growth, different greens attracting a little bit different light from the sun, so that it's not too monotonous. And in that way, creating even greater contrast then with the very plain fields that we are seeing from this vantage point. Now I'm just once again clean that brush off. Now I'm getting another brush. Pretty soon I'm going to go in with a rigger brush, or a liner brush. They call it a rigger or a liner. It's a very long brush, but very skinny. You can paint telephone lines and fence posts and that kind of thing with this. And for this painting, I'm going to be painting basically some foliage. Think of little branches and sticks in that extreme foreground. Here, I've really covered the palette with a lot of colors, and so if you want to save some of those old scrapings of the paint, you can always just do what I did and kind of reposition them. Now I'm going to clean off that section with my paper towel, so that way I will not be tempted to make more mud, but have enough area to produce some new color mixtures. So that's what I'm doing there. Felt like there just wasn't quite enough detail in the foreground. And we really want to play up the contrast between kind of the overgrown hill area here in the foreground and then what looks to be farmland in the distance. So I'm beginning with the foreground to use some lighter colors first. You can do it either way you want. And I am going to, there you go, I'm holding the brush at the very tip. Remember this gives you the ability to not be able to control it too much. And so I want to suggest that there's some grasses or foliage that's kind of growing. Late summer, they get a kind of a brown color, correct? And so putting that in there. At the same time, I realize I'm kind of obliterating the dark greens I put in earlier. Here, just trying to get some random brush strokes flowing in this area to suggest to your eyes that we've got some foliage sticking up and growing. And then I'm already thinking at this point that after I put this in, I'm going to be coming back over top of that with darks, which would mean that I'm going to be mixing up ultramarine blue and madder lake to create a darker purple that will also stand out and suggest to the viewer that they're very close to that foliage, as opposed to some of the other places in the painting. See how just those few little lines have already kind of produced some more detail. You get a sense that there's some taller grasses here, that we really are in the wilderness. This is certainly not a well-worn path or a national park scene. This is kind of out and away from where folks are. There you can see my rigger brush I was talking about, the very thin end. And here I'm beginning to mix up with another brush, because certainly with the rigger it's hard to mix with that one. I could have done this with a palette knife, but oftentimes I find it quicker just to grab the brush I'm going to be using and create the mixture that way. So I've created a dark mixture, and now I'm taking the rigger brush with some quick dry medium, Cobra quick dry medium, and saturating the brush head with that dark color. And the same technique, pulling upwards to create variety and a sense of movement from the wind. These darker colors representing perhaps some darker grasses or twigs, brush, plants growing in the foreground. And of course, with the darker color, it helps to bring that forward to make it seem much closer to you. And from this vantage point, you'll notice that that dark purple blends in quite nicely with the greens. You don't get a sense that it's out of place at all, but that it deserves to be there. And also notice one of the things I'm trying to do is, even as I'm adding this detail, I really don't want you to spend a lot of time focused on this detail in the foreground. I want you to get the sense that you're looking over top of this towards that field, which, because it is so bright, and I made every effort to make sure that there was a big contrast between that green and then the more natural tones that we find in this foreground hill. That's where the focal point is. So even though I'm adding the detail in this foreground, I'm doing it in a rather low key way. So it's not pulling your attention away from that field. You notice it, but you quickly are ready to move forward into that distant spot. And like I said, sometimes as you're going along in the painting, you make some mistakes. And I'm about to make another mistake that I wish I hadn't made. Oftentimes when there's so many greens, you want to try to find ways to bring some red into it to help you out. Now first, this is yellow permanent, and I'm using some of that quick dry medium, and I'm going to put a little bit of yellow with some of this shrubbery in the foreground, just to give it a little bit more life. Not much, just a little bit, as you can see. Once again, I don't want to distract you and pull all of your attention towards this upfront foliage and sticks. That's not the focus of the painting. But I do want to bring some of this lighter green that you kind of see in the field. It's often good to put that same color elsewhere. Otherwise, if a particular color is only found in one little section of your painting, then it looks odd. It doesn't look as natural as it should. And so you need to find a little bit of a place that you can take that same color and use it as a highlight somewhere else. Can be quite effective. And so even just those few strokes, I think, gives you a sense of calming down the contrast just enough. Here I'm still relatively pleased with the outcome. Here's where it goes bad, and that is oftentimes to break up greens. Green really thrives the complement red. And so we've got, just like, think of Christmas, red and green, right? Well, I'm putting a little bit of red in the foreground and using that red, that Madder Lake, kind of right out of the tube. Didn't really mix it with anything else. A couple of those would be great, but then I did that. And didn't, as I moved away, I noticed that I kind of made a cross with that red, and it just did not look very natural. And then I'm going to make it even worse by attempting to go back into it, and then I end up creating kind of a red blob. Ugh, you're going to see that in just a minute. And then it's going to become necessary for me to do something else. Now here, I'm just noticing that there's a lot of green in this area, and in order to get away from just thinking of this as one big green mass, by adding this titanium white and light brown mixture with all the primaries, that varies the shade of green a little bit, perhaps suggesting that there are places where there's some some barren ground that's showing through, maybe some pebbles or rocks or something. And then, of course, your finger is always a good tool to do a little bit of blending. And so I'm adding some of that there. I'm relatively happy with that. That color worked very well with that green and breaking it up just enough to suggest a few masses and a few extra foliage pieces. But like I said, this red has become kind of a purple blob right there. And here I go, and this is when I make it even worse. I'm trying to actually erase it, and then as I step back from it, I'm noticing that your attention is now immediately drawn to the red. It's overwhelming. It's not dark enough. It's too light. So what do? I could have taken a palette knife and scraped that whole section off. I decide instead that I'm going to go in with a little bit darker purpley brown and kind of erase the whole light area that I had painted previously. So we'll see how that looks, because that way we'll break up the green. It also serves to complement the green, and your eye is going to thrive to see some greens. So here we go. So here I go, and I'm just trying to cover up my mistake with this brownish gray mixture. So I'm looking at that intensely to see if that might work. Difficult for me to see whether it's working yet. And so I'm going to begin to just put it everywhere. Just start laying this color in over top of the real light spots. And actually, I do think it's beginning to work now. As you can see, those spots go in and take some of the focus away from it. But I'm going to continue to work on it for a few minutes so you can watch me as I do that. When you're making mistakes of your own, it's important to realize that that's part of the painting process. Is learning how to paint is also learning how to deal with a mistake that you have made in a painting. There would have been a time in which I might have just decided, well, that's it. I'm just going to throw this one away. But there's no need to do that. You can often paint right over top of that color. Or like I said, you could go back in and scrape it out if you didn't like it. Here, I decided to just mix right on the canvas and see if I can save this section by working into it a new color. By the way, I was using the round brush again. That's a number 2 round brush. Of course, the numbers on brushes, I need to let you know, are not standard sizes. Every company sort of names their sizes just a little bit different. You won't find too big of a variety between say a number 4 in one brand and a number 4 in another, but from time to time you can see a difference. That it's not a standardized size of some kind. So keep that in mind whenever you're purchasing brushes. That if you buy a 4 flat from Rosemary Company, that's going to be a little bit different than if you're buying it from Princeton. All right, I'm just about done with the painting now, and I've decided that this is good, and I'm going to sign it using a rubber-tipped instrument. If you like the content, may I remind you, please subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up. If you're interested in any artwork that you see in these videos, I oftentimes sell them on eBay. Just look under the name David Wesley Poe. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.